All right, so D-Day tomorrow, 8 o'clock. Will the striking nurses return to work, or will they face the sack? But just what sort of numbers are we dealing with? According to the Kenya National of Union Nurses Secretary General Seth Panyako, he says about 10,000 nurses are on strike at the moment, with a total number of 26,000 nurses working across the various 47 county governments. So those are the numbers we're dealing with. But the issues at the heart of the contention of this particular strike didn't just start when they called for it about 10 days ago. It dates back to 2016. So let's take a timeline there. So December the 5th, just about the time that the doctors were ending their now famous 100-day strike, the nurses went on strike. And they were seeking for the negotiation of a collective bargaining agreement, of course, its signing and its implementation. Among some of the issues in that CBA, service allowance and uniform allowance. So they took to the streets. This strike, however, did not last long, because on the 14th of December, I want to take you back just a little bit, because on the 14th of December, they signed a return to work formula. The CBA was to be negotiated and signed a couple of months later by March the 2nd of 2017. But there was no progress between December the 14th and the next year, June 5th, 2017, 6 months later, they called for a strike. This was to be the mother of all strikes. Most medical experts, or those in that field, called it the worst public health crisis in Kenya's history. Maternity, surgeries, inpatient services were all crippled during the 5 months that they were on strike. What were they seeking for? They wanted, again, that CBA signed and implemented to the tune of 7.8 billion shillings. It's important to note that this is where SRC came in, and that perhaps the nurses say is a bit of a complication for them. At the time, Sarah Sarem, who's the chair of the SRC, disowned the CBA. She said the governors ignored her advice on the nurses' demands. During the 5 months period, quite a bit of upheaval. The governors hired other nurses on contract. Those who were on strike were struck off the payroll. Disciplinary action was in fact initiated for those who refused to obey the return to work notice. But after 5 months of this, well, on November the 5th, there was a meeting, tripartite, between the governors, the government, and the nurses, and the strike was called off. The nurses returned to work the next day. What did they get at this point? They got a uniform allowance. It was increased from 10,000 to 15,000, and it was supposed to be paid in 2 tranches. They also got a service allowance that was to be between around 20 to 25,000, depending on the job grade, and that was to be implemented in the next financial year. In fact, the chair of the COG at the time, Governor Josphat Nanok, said that they would get up to 30,000 in what they called a risk allowance, and then that would be done during the 2020-2021 financial year. What happened? The disciplinary cases that had been issued over the 5 months were withdrawn. The salaries were to be released. The CBA itself was to be concluded, signed, and registered with the court in 1 month, in 30 days. But it was a bit of a long road. The relationship continued to remain tense, because even between this time, in January 2018, Seth Panyako, the Secretary General of the Nurses Union, called out 11 counties. He said they refused to live up to the bargain and were still withholding salaries that had been withheld during the 5-month strike. In November 2018, now that's last year, Seth Panyako again issued another strike threat after a meeting between them and the SRC failed to take off. They also took issue with the SRC grading them as semi-skilled workers. Now, by that time, only 3 had met the return to work formula agreement. 3 counties, that's Machakos, Mombasa, and Migori. And that brings us to this year. That's February the 4th, when the strike began again, following what the nurses said was a failure of the county governments and the national government to honor the agreement that was signed way back in 2017. Exactly a day later, the COG moved to the Employment and Labour courts, and they were seeking for more time for conciliation talks. The court agreed with them and suspended the strike for 60 days to allow for courts. But the nurses remained defiant. In fact, just a few days later, nurses from the referral hospitals, that's Mathare Hospital, the National Spine Injury, the Blood Bank, and the Port Health Department at the Jomo Kenyatta International Airport, all joined the strike. And remember, those are employed by the national government. Then, from this moment, when the court asked them to suspend the strike, to yesterday, when the president, upset with the nurses for refusing to obey the court order, ordered them to return to work by tomorrow morning. Now, a couple of things here. That strike that took place in 2017, that took 5 months, according to experts in the medical field, say would have long-lasting effects. You see, a lot of vaccinations and immunizations, important ones, were missed. Those who go to public hospitals opted to not go to private hospitals because they couldn't afford them. Many fear that the fight against diseases like measles and polio would then have been dealt a blow by that one. And that is why, in this standoff that exists at this moment, many are hoping that this will not go the 5 months that the one in 2017 did. It's been 10 days. Tomorrow morning, 8 o'clock, is D-Day. Who will blink first? We'll see. That's our explainer tonight. Let's take a break. We'll be right back.